Oh man, welcome everybody back to Voxbox. Today I'm joined by Nash. We're talking about Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman. Nash, say hello. This is an interesting one because this is the first book where I can honestly say you listen to the audiobook. The only audiobook of any of the Dungeon Crawler Carls I listened to was the most recent one, and only for about 2 chapters. So we have two uh, very different first impressions of this book because I read it full on just on my spare time at work, and you listened to it while you're at the gym and doing whatever. And I would argue that you got the better deal because it is such a prolific audiobook. What did you think of this outset one?
Uh, I think first of all, like, I'm not I'm not usually an audiobook person. I think I've talked to you about this in the past, and part of the reason I switched over was convincing from you and also Greg, shout out Greg if you ever listen to this. Boom. It was kinda just like, get into them. Audiobooks are a great way to continue to enjoy books on the commute, and this way I can, try to at least hold somewhat of like a third of the pace that you read books in Goodreads. So, um,
Okay, fair,
I was like, "You know
fair.
what? It's a good commute. It's a good thing to add to my commute because I got a 30-minute drive into work." And oh my god, dude, Jeff Hayes is just a master of his craft. Like, I think I would have enjoyed the book, a lot if I read it as well, but just the amount of flavor, the amount of individuality that Jeff Hayes is able to weave into every single individual character of this novel, it takes it from maybe like a 9.9 to a 15 out of 10, on just shoots it through the stratosphere. Every single
Uh-huh.
character sounds so unique, they sound so original, he adds, like, every single emotion in their voices you can hear. It enhances every aspect of the book from Donut and Carl's banter to, even just the achievements, right? Like, I cannot see
Yeah.
new achievement without hearing Jeff Hayes just scream it in my ear now in his kind of quirky alien voice that I loved every second of it. It has completely won me over to audiobooks. I was saying this, before we actually started the recording to Nick, was that this series convinced me to get Audible. Like I was never on board with it before, but now every single time I get a credit on Audible, it goes right towards Dungeon Crawler Carl. So if that's probably the highest praise I could possibly give it. I'm all the way here for the audiobooks.
I I You have mentioned in the past that you're not a huge audiobook fan, and the only reason I do audiobooks is so I can get through books as fast as I do. But mostly I use them for like high fantasy ones where I can't pronounce the names. This didn't have any problems with that. It was, Donut, Carl, Mordecai, simple stuff like that. Amani, Chris, Brandon, all the characters in it are so much more simplistic, and I think they have to be. And, what's very interesting, I think, in that respect is that it's meant to be a book about real people who are thrown into a situation where they're not prepared for. And I went into the book expecting one thing, and I think I got something entirely different out of it, where I thought it was gonna be like "Oh, cool, he just kinda ends up in a dungeon, not, "Oh, shit, they killed everybody on the planet except for a bunch of people who could find stairwells down into the first level of the dungeon." So my experience with the book right out of the gate was like, "Oh, it's a funny book about a guy in his underwear and his cat." No, it isn't. It's actually kinda serious. And I think as someone and you know this, and you probably had the same feeling, but as someone who is super big into, like, Dungeons& and Dragons and TTRPGs, this book spoke to me on, like, a huge level because I was so familiar with the concepts that they're throwing at it, like hot bars and potions and, like, the levels and classes and everything. I'm like, "Okay, this book is primo. I'm
Yeah.
loving every second of this." Um, yeah, I just think it's an interesting story, and I have 1 physical copy, and this is the other thing. You have it on Audible, I have it on Kindle Unlimited, and I think it's a fucking crime that you can get every single one of these books for free on Kindle Unlimited because they are worth so much money. It crazy to me. But I think the real star of the show in Jeff Hayes and this is obviously Princess Donut. Who doesn't love a, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's just such an interesting story, but
Yeah,
yeah.
this is this is my first experience with I believe I don't know if it's the genre exactly, but I've heard it described as a lit RPG.
Yep.
And I didn't really know what to expect going into it. I've kinda described it in the past as, like, I don't know, Sword Art Online meet D&D meets, I can't even say grimdark because it's absolutely not grimdark, but it gets fucking dark. I mean, when
Yeah.
Carl's going in, dropping bombs into a boss chamber, accidentally, murdering 20-something goblin babies,
That's my favorite
yeah,
that is I was thinking about that. That is my favorite sentence where Donut's just like, "Man, there were sure a lot of babies in there," and then it cuts to a different chapter.
new
It's
achievement, war criminal.
perfect. Oh my god, this is such a good part. But
Yeah,
yeah, lit
yeah.
RPG, you are correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't really know what to expect going into it, but obviously, it combines a lot of elements of things that I'm a big fan of, that I know you're a big fan of. I know
Mhm,
anybody obviously who has engaged with popular media like Dungeons and Dragons in the past. Dinnerman is not yeah, what would the word be? He's not covert in his comparisons. He straight up says, "Oh yeah, this is like this thing from Dungeons and Dragons." Wait, I kept questioning like, is that allowed? You never see the modern literature. Especially with Wizards of the Coast, but, yeah, it was really cool, and it's a nice element of the book for people who have this familiar experience, I think, with these, comparative, equations that Dinneman constantly makes, because it really helps you to visualize, I think, the setting. It helps you to visualize exactly what's going on. It helps you to visualize, every element of this crafted dungeon, because those comparisons are constantly made, right? And I think that was, like, almost a criticism that I had when I initially started listening to it, but it does make the read a lot easier in this first book by being like, "Oh, I don't really need to speculate. I know exactly what he means because I know this comparison. This is something from my niche interest categorization that I can just pull in 2 seconds," you know? And I do think Dinneman does a great job of working his way out of that, in book 2. I think that he relies a lot less on those comparisons, but I think that, while it was something I criticized initially when I was kind of reading through it or listening through it rather, it is something I have grown to appreciate almost a little bit more about the text because it's always comparisons to things that I quite enjoy. That a lot of the people who are into these lit RPG novels probably are either very, very familiar with or enjoy just as much as the book they're reading. So it enhances the experience for them that much more, which was really cool. And I mean, like you've already talked about how great the protagonists are here. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more, but
mhm.
Carl is equal parts fascinating and I think incredibly unique. Like he is not just some Gary Stu character coming into a dungeon picking like the paladin class or whatever. I play a paladin
Mhm.
in D&D. I could say these things.
He
But
plays a paladin in a campaign I wrote inspired by Dungeon Crawler Carl, so yeah,
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 yeah.
you
So
can
I'm
say
calling
that, yeah.
myself out here.
Yeah.
But I love the uniqueness of Carl's character, even down to the fact that he's just some dude wearing his boxers and his girlfriend's Crocs,
Mhm.
undersized. He's like the way that he fights, everything from his focus on monks, some sort of monkish class where he's using his fists at his feet to throwing sticks of dynamite. It's a very big break from, I think, the traditional fantasy protagonist. And then his companions of his girlfriend, his ex-girlfriend's talking cat, who also happens to have like a royalty complex. Like, you can't, I don't think you can pick another book in modern literature or historical literature where you could really make any comparison between the protagonists and what you see in Dungeon Crawler Carl. And that uniqueness right out the bat, it hooks you.
Yeah, and I would say you're right, and the uniqueness is what gets you, and it's the, compare like, not compared with, but in addition to the AI constantly, like, weirdly fetishizing Carl's feet and the idea that he's always half dressed and everything like that. The concept kind of falls into what I like to consider like the MMORPG failsafe, where you start off with like an idea of what you want your character to look like, and then you just keep getting specific armor and weapons that just
Oh,
focus on one thing, so you end up looking like
this is
ridiculous.
how much.
And Carl starts off ridiculous and keeps getting more and more ridiculous as the books go on. But the heart of Carl at its whole, and I think I'll show you this. This is my favorite. I just dropped a bunch of stuff. I have the hardcover, and if you take the dust jacket off, the quote on each of the books changes, but this one
Yes.
sort of remains timeless. "You will not break me." And I remember recently I saw this post where this guy was saying that Carl is a right-wing conservative, and if that's the message you got from Dungeon Crawler Carl or any of the Dungeon Crawler Carl books, you've missed, like, a key aspect of Carl's character, and I think it's in book 2. It's either book 2 or book 3 where Carl says, um, "If you don't like something about your life, change it. Don't let others make decisions for you,"
Yeah, because he's
or
talking
something to that effect.
the
He's
orcish
talking about the
government.
NPC.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, Carl as a whole starts off as someone who's like, "I don't wanna be in this scenario," and then very quickly takes the reluctant hero position, not because he is destined to fall into it, because he is so I don't even know how to put this. This is not something that would have come up for, you yet, but he's so traumatized from his life that he feels like it's on him to serve that protector role, the savior complex, so to speak. But the AI develops a weird fascination for him because he draws in viewers so early on, him and Donut, especially with blowing up a bunch of babies. And I'm pretty sure it's still this, what they, oh, what is it? The hoarder, the really, really like fat boss
The
that they
early
run
boss that they
into.
fight?
The
Yeah.
early, yeah, yeah, yeah. And they like blow him up and it's just disgusting everywhere and they work as a team. Like a, uh, oh, she's done so early. Like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like someone putting together a raid team in an MMORPG that has no idea what they're doing and just kind of like skates by is so genius to me. But like the book itself works because Carl is both that everyman that you were talking about, like that he's not just like a what is it, a paladin, but also because he's got integrity that most people wouldn't have in a situation like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally I get what you're saying, and I think I'm definitely inclined to agree. I love the characterization of Carl. I think that at first he has a tendency like he sounds very basic when you're getting introduced to him, and like the further you go throughout the story with him, even just visualization aside, the layers really seem to start to get peeled back. Like I just finished book 2. Like I said, obviously every month I read a Dungeon Crawler Carl book because that's where my Audible stuff goes to, or and I feel like I'm really starting to see that, already at the point in book 2. I know I think you've read all of them at this point, so you probably know this way
I
better than
have.
I do, but I love that. I love exploring them, but I do think that, I think that that's not complicated. Complicated is the wrong word. I think that that's complemented, sorry, by his relationship with Donut. I think that Carl starts to learn a lot more about himself as a character as he starts to appreciate Donut's presence more. And I think that Carl and Donut throughout this book, Jeff Dinneman does a really good job of
Matt
obviously
did it.
like, sorry, goodness, Matt Dinneman.
You're
Reading my
now you're
notes at the
mashing
same
them up.
time.
You're like Jeff Hayes and Matt Hayes and Jeff Dinneman. I mean, Bruce Mann and Batwing. Yeah. Oh boy.
But yeah, so Matt Dinneman, he does such a good job of, I think, really showing you that Carl has a niche in this book and Donut has a niche in this book, and they both are they excel in those niches, right? Carl is the dungeon crawler. Carl is the guy that he's gonna kick ass in fights and he's gonna take names, and he is very fantastic in this role. He is, I mean, it's right in his title that is thrown at us when the royal court of Princess Donut gets formed, very early on
Oh
there.
yeah.
He's the royal bodyguard, right? And sometimes you see his frustration play through in things like interviews, and he can make good points sometimes. And he's getting quoted by his fan base, and he's getting quoted on the interviews themselves. But that part of the dungeon crawl is not necessarily Carl's strength, whereas it is Donut's, right? Whereas when Donut gets into these social situations and things like the interviews, that is where she shines. She's chatting up the host. She's getting the audience on her side. Sometimes she's, as we see in this book with, oh gosh, what is the show called at the very end where they get brought on
Odette
by the sorry?
Odette's show?
No,
Like,
so Audette's show is the one where, like, they actually are they're supposed to be there. I'm talking about more so the one with the orcish host, at the
oh,
end.
that guy oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hang
And
on.
you
No,
see Donut, like, turn the crowd against him, to a point, right?
yeah,
It's very fascinating because they're told early on, you have to be entertaining and you have to win the crowd over early if you want to be able to make it far in this scenario. And I think that Matt Ditterman, like, very subtly shows you that perhaps Carl alone or Donut alone might not have been able to achieve that, right? Because they have very complementary styles of, abilities and play styles that really help each other out in achieving that popularity, right? It's not Crawler Carl necessarily that is one of the most popular. It's not Crawler Donut that is one of the most popular. It's they're watching Carl and Donut together, right? And that synergy is I think one of the greatest strengths of the book, and just listening to the banter between them is oh, it's magnificent.
very funny, yeah. I You actually just reminded me of something, and it's the crawlers themselves, and how the relationship between Carl and Donut is one thing, but the other relationship that we see kind of show up here is the 2 crawlers. Oh, what are their names? I've been thinking about it. It's they attack them in the safe room,
Oh,
and
yeah, Maggie Mai and, um,
that's what it is.
oh gosh, what's the guy's name?
Um, I don't remember either, but this should tell you how long this takes for them to settle this, but I don't remember them past book 6. But it sets up that idea early on that you're like, "Oh, like in Sword Art Online, there are other people who are player killers." Like, people who are now just out to satisfy that desire they have to, like, murder other people. And then you have people like Chris and Brandon and Imani who are working very, very hard to keep a group of senior citizens from a senior citizens home alive and together. So you have, on one end, like, the best of humanity and the worst of humanity thrown in this mix, forced to participate in in an intergalactic game show that they did not have any choice in, and in the middle of it, you have a guy and his cat has now somehow taken the reins from him in setting up this group and the royal princess, princess posse. Oh, the princess posse is later. The royal court of Princess Donut is what I'm thinking of. But I think that's why this book to me stood out so quickly, and I remember this because I bought this book, I read 2 chapters, and then my ex and I broke up, and I moved back home, and I didn't pick up a book for, like, 3 months, and then I went back to reading when I started work, and I got through this book, and I kept going through all of them because I couldn't put any of them down, and part of that is because in this book sets up so many plot lines that extend throughout the books that I'm never having to, like, go back and remind myself because they keep going, and Matt Dinniman, I think, has done a wonderful job of setting up the story in this book, and he does a wonderful job of building on it each and every month for you each and every month, each and every book, because he has something that we all love that is a huge, popularity like RPGs, tabletop or MMO or whatever, and expands on it in a situation where you're like, oh, this is both like really relatable, but also super funny and that end bit, the super funny bit, I think is where people try and fail when they write these books, but Dinneman hasn't. Like the banter between Donut and Carl is quite funny. The line, "There were a lot of babies in there," is pretty funny. There is like, things like that are so important. I think people forget to make books funny because they're so focused on being serious, and Dinneman is not. But, that's just one specific thing that I look for in all books. And ironically, later, the Dungeon Crawler Carl books are a little less funny and incredibly serious, but I love them all the more because they started with the funny and leaned into the serious. But it's just what a book. What a book series, man.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Um, I think there's a lot to unpack there. Sorry, my mic seems like it's a little loud there. I'm gonna turn this down.
That's
Uh,
cool.
but I feel like the humor is, at least in the first book especially, it is absolutely one of, if not the greatest strength of the books, right? It's hilarious when it's consistently giving you all of these, even just something as simple as the new achievements. Like I'm pretty sure I'm laughing almost every single time that those come up, especially when it is in Jeff Hayes' masterful voice. It just hits you out of nowhere, especially, when Carl is out here, sometimes he's committing war crimes, who's to say? Or sometimes he's doing some weird shit, or sometimes especially when the AI is talking about Carl's feet, like, the
Yeah.
voice that Jeff Hayes just he puts on turns into this, like, lustful husk, and it catches you completely off guard, which is I guess, kinda speaks back to our point before where, like, you gotta if you get the chance to, definitely check out the next book in the audible form, because it just adds that extra masterful layer, especially if the humor is, I think, what you like about some of these elements of the early books. Jeff Hayes just amplifies it that much more. But I do think that is something that gets said about these books a lot based on, podcasts I've listened to, based on interviews that I've kind of listened to in the past. Gotta be careful to avoid spoilers in some of those interviews, so I don't always go too far in. But I don't think that the prose is necessarily something that Dungeon Crawler Carl gets praised for, and I think that that's okay. At least in the beginning, I feel like the focus is on the strength of the characters, like we've talked about. The focus is on the strength of the humor. The focus is on establishing the world and building these character connections, building these plots and subplots that are going to come back around so that when Dinneman can kind of, swing back around to them, I feel like we're probably going to be in a much more grounded, original state where he's got all these plot lines that have been going that he's been fleshing out for multiple books by this point that I don't necessarily know would be achievable. Like I don't know if I could have taken this book overly seriously in the first book as it's establishing these settings, as you're getting ear blasted by a new achievement, baby killer, like
Mhm.
every 2 seconds.
Mm.
Or Donut coming onto the screen, screaming in all caps because that's what
Yeah.
because she only types in all caps. I think that you need that, especially in this very first book as the series is finding its footing, and it absolutely sticks the landing. Like, there's so many good things you can say about this book, but I do think that, as you've rightfully pointed out, humor is most definitely one of the biggest early ones. But with that said, I know that when I started reading this, a part of me was like, the world building is a little shallow. I feel like a lot of the strength comes from its comparisons or, the lit RPG element of just building the dungeon and like half of this is Dungeons and Dragons. But I think that was really naive of me. I've revisited that point in my head a little bit more upon further reflection and getting into the second book. And I do think that Dinneman still gives us a pretty fascinating glimpse into a lot of what's going on behind the scenes through characters like, let's say, Zev or like Mordecai or like Odette. In the brief snippets of political information that characters like Carl and Donut are getting when they interact with these figures who understand a little bit more about the bigger picture, right? Like we know that the Borg Corporation is in a lot more trouble than it might appear to the people on Earth, even though they can casually just terraform Earth in 2 seconds, topple us. They seeded we got seeded at some point, right? But despite all this power that we would think comes from this overwhelmingly supreme alien civilization, we're hearing from those types of characters like, "Oh, no, Bourne's actually in a lot of trouble. That's why they wanna wrap this game up so quickly," right? Because I don't remember which, corporation is threatening to annex them or call in some debts or something. They've got their fleet on the edge of the Bourne solar system. But just that level of detail, I think, even outside of the dungeon scenario that Dinneman has created, is something that maybe I didn't necessarily consider, as much early doors, and something I have come back around to more, as it continues to present itself, right? Because something happens at the end of book 2 that also really severely impacts Borant.
Ye
And you can tell the fine threads of all of those storylines that Dinneman is layering. It's a much more detailed analysis, or it's a much more detailed, rather, building of the world around this dungeon that is so much bigger than Earth than I think that I initially gave it credit for when I was so focused on the dungeon itself. And that's not to take away from the dungeon. I think the dungeon expands significantly in its own building, especially in book two. But I think that there's a lot to talk about in that capacity as well. So
I think your critique of the world building is fair, especially in book 1, because I also kind of at first, I just imagined this massive maze that occasionally had buildings, but I then thought about it like this, and I thought about it like RuneScape, the tutorial island for RuneScape, where you're in this, like, one central area when you're still trying to figure out how everything works. It's the same idea, and the answer to that comes in the form of the training guilds, and one of my favorite characters, Mordecai,
Oh,
who
yes.
realistically, he takes a different shape every floor, but in this floor, I think he's a rat like Splinter, like Master Splinter. Yeah, 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 and I think his approach and the approach that Didiman takes to his character is so interesting and such a necessary part of this book specifically that the character himself has ramifications many throughout basically every single book, but his impact in this one is so much higher because he spends his entire time teaching Carl and teaching him what to do and what not to do. And he plays this like protector because he has to, and if he makes it all the way to a certain floor, his service is done. But we don't know a lot about Mordecai right away, and that also lends to the effectiveness of his character because he's like a good side character in an RPG. Like, if we were to take Cyberpunk, for example, in this instance, we have someone like, Rogue from the Afterlife, who you learn about throughout, like, the whole game, and then you, like, have this deeper connection to. Mordecai is the same way because he helps Carl and Donut. He I think he forgets to mention that he's like, "Oh, by the way, if Donut eats this, there's a chance she's not gonna be a cat," and she eats it accidentally or something, and then she turns into, like, the blob and becomes Donut again. But his I'm trying to remember when one particular item happens, and I don't think you've gotten to it yet, but when his character becomes more of a focus in some of the later books, or not a focus, so to speak, but more of one of the main cast, he remains helpful, which is good because I think in a lot of books, in a lot of fantasy books, like the people the main characters meet right away tend to outlive their usefulness by like the second book. And I'm thinking of like if we're thinking about like Stormlight, if the rest of Bridge 4 hadn't gotten like Windrunner powers, the likelihood of them sticking around would have been very, very small. You know what I mean? But Mordecai Mordecai doesn't leave because Mordecai always has something more to offer, and Carl and Donut always need Mordecai because he has a deeper knowledge of how any of this works than anybody else. And I think he is directly tied into the world building of the first book because he's basically the tutorial guide. And in the tutorial, you never get like your full expanse of the game. You'll never get like what the tutorial is like, hey, you have the unlimited open world to do all of this, just do it at some point. No, like level one has to be acclimating, assimilating to the culture. So yeah, it's got like the buildings that looks like Pizza Huts or whatever they use. And then the very next floor is like fucking Ancard from Sword Art Online or whatever the fairy one was, where it's just
Oh,
like
yeah.
sprawling trees and everything. So it gets more and more ridiculous and a little bit more expansive as time goes on. But floor one was a necessity because the people are just like, I'm dead. Honestly, if it was me and somebody, everyone I knew just suddenly died and a stairway showed up down, if it was anything other than other buildings, I'd probably be like, I'm clearly on acid. I am definitely going to die. This is the end. I'm fucked. So, I think it's lacking, but it's what's the word I'm looking for? Intentionally lacking because they need to have that sort of soft lead in to the bigger picture. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, absolutely, and I definitely agree. Like I said, I revisited that stance. I don't necessarily feel the same way anymore about it being quote unquote lacking. But I think that it definitely is a really, really, really good foundation for the series as it moves on, and it gives us. I think your comparison here to a tutorial setting, I believe in like in RuneScape, is a beautiful one. I did not even consider that really seems to fit the series quite well. I just wanna, like, kind of circle back around, to Mordecai because, oh my gosh, what a character. Um, I totally agree, he's definitely one of my favorites. I feel like in this book, you come away liking a number of characters, but to my mind, I don't know how your big 3 can't be Carl, Donut, and Mordecai. Like, they carry the novel forward. Mordecai, I feel like there are some points where Dinniman obviously, he uses Mordecai, as you said, and as he says, like, he's a tutorial guide, right? So sometimes it just feels like there's a lot more of telling than there is showing, but there has to be, right? That's the nature of the game. That's his whole role as the tutorial guide is to help them and to tell them, "This is how this works. Be cool, guys." But you start to see a little bit more of those layers peel off later on as Mordecai will kind of, he'll give them the message in their messaging system rather than speaking aloud, like, hey, Oren wouldn't want you to know this, but here's this, right? Where it kind of personalizes him more as an individual who is, actively trying to help them. And then you contrast this with, say, we talked earlier about Frank Q and Maggie Mai, right? The player killers. And to an extent, I do believe, like, obviously, it kind of, there's good people and there's bad people, but it also, I think it's an interesting comparison because you find out later at the end of the first book that Frank Q and Maggie Mai are player killers because their tutorial guide told them, oh, you got to kill other people, right? So if Carl and Donut hadn't had Mordecai to really steer them in a little bit more of the morally correct direction, what would have become of them, right? And I do think that, there's a really cool evolution of Mordecai's character, and I think I know what you're talking about because the item that, quote, unquote, maybe binds him to the story, there's something happens in book 2 that Donut gets, that
That yeah,
leads
you're
to a
thinking
little
the
bit of a
same thing.
new relationship, between the 3 of them that maybe he's
Yeah,
not as happy about, but that's spoilers,
yeah.
I'm not gonna talk about that at all. Um but I like to see you can see there's a little bit more of an evolution in Mordecai where he starts to care about them a little bit more. Like, in the beginning, I remember when, it's just Carl talking to Mordecai, uh, and Donut just recklessly, like, she's like, "Ooh, new crown. That looks so nice, I'm gonna put that on." Mordecai's like, "Wait, no, read the description." Mordecai goes to Carl after, and he's like, "Well, it's a really powerful item. You can just hang out with her for the first 8 floors and then ditch her after. It doesn't matter." Hmm. But naturally, I'm inclined to think that the Mordecai of the books, as I'm getting into 2 and 3, he would be a little bit more hesitant to make that recommendation, right? Especially, well, obviously because of the nature of the new item, what it does to him, that's gonna change what he says a little bit. But just more in he seems like he takes that extra step, He's not just the tutorial guide. He is a helpful character that really contributes to the plot of both Carl and Donut, and genuinely, for the most part, seems to have their best interest in mind. And you know what? If he betrays them later on, and I'm just speaking out of my ass here, because I know you know everything that's going to happen in like 6 more books that I do. But I really like that dynamic. I think the 3 of them together are great. I think he also enhances, obviously, Donut and Carl to the extremes. Like, they wouldn't survive without him. And maybe he keeps Donut a little bit more accountable, like, someone's gotta keep telling her, "Hey, don't do that, don't do that." But there's so much character growth in literally just this side character, um, just like there is in Carl and Donut. Like, if we're talking about I don't think we've talked about Donut nearly as much as we probably should have already by this point. If anyone's
Agreed.
listening to this, we're 30 minutes in, they're like, "Give me Donut conversation."
Yeah,
Like,
where's the donut?
yeah,
Where's more? We need more of the donut.
she's so
I
damn fabulous, they haven't talked about her enough.
One of the things I wanna talk about, though, is before we get to donut quickly, is I forgot how much happened in this book, and just like a quick reread over it a second ago when I was trying to find a specific spot. Um I forget, like, you have, Mongo shows up,
Oh my god,
which
yeah, that's this
I
book.
completely forgot about. I thought that was book 2 as well. I thought that was later. Um, I think you kind of get a small glimpse at who Agatha is, really,
Yes.
um, which is a mystery that is still yet to resolve itself. Um, and I think one of the aspects of this that I think is so interesting is the same thing you get when you play, like, early levels in an RPG, where you are incredibly vulnerable to the point where one of my favorite moments in the book is when the old dude starts pissing on the wall and the rage
Oh, yeah.
demon shows up and they and he just, like, tears through people, where it's that low level player fear where you're like, "I'm about to die.
Yeah.
There's no chance." And you feel that a little bit, and you kind of lose I don't wanna say you lose it in later books, but by, like, book 5, you're fairly certain Carl is gonna keep making it. Like, you're not like now that there's 8 books out, you know Carl's safe for at least 8 books. Like, he's the main character. But if I was reading this book for the first time and that was the only book out, I'd be like, "He's dead. There's no way they're making a second one." But, you know, characters like RPG characters, there's great thing I think I said this to you during one of our campaigns where I said I read something where you have to almost kill your players at level 4 before they become like gods at level 5 in D&D. And D.
It's about sending a message.
And yeah, so sending a message. I feel like Dinneman reflects that a lot in the way he writes, especially the first 2 books. Even I would say even the first 3, if the 3rd book is the one I think it is. I can't remember what comes first. Gate of the Feral Gods is 4, Butcher's Masquerade is 5. So 3 must be Anarchist Cookbook. Yeah, Anarchist Cookbook. And I feel like that's a necessary part of this because you have a dude in his underwear and a fucking cat. They're not superheroes right away, but Donut, God bless her, Donut is so lucky with the gear she gets that make her the living embodiment of a glass cannon in this world because the magic missile spell, her claw spell, I think she gets puddle jumper in this one. I'm pretty sure it's this one, puddle jumper. But she's built to be she out of the two of them, she is the stronger one for basically the whole series. Like her magic skills are so pivotal to the story and the character as a whole of Donut is the most interesting, in my opinion, because of the growth that Donut goes through throughout the books and the simultaneous lack of growth she goes through because the all caps thing never goes away.
I
That
don't ever
never
want it to.
ends.
But I'd
I
need that to stay.
there's like a 4 or 5 page thing in book 8 where everyone's trying to convince her to turn all caps off and she's like, "No, I won't. I want everyone to think I'm yelling everything." But I think you know, we add to this list of characters with every book in a sense, but Dungeon Crawler Carl at its core, the book is about Donut and Carl. There is no no discussion about that. Like those two are the heart of the book. They could be the last two crawlers in the dungeon and the book would still be about them. Like it is just a it's just I don't know how to put this. It's like a love letter to pet owners who care so much about their pets, but also a love letter to pet owners whose boyfriends hate their fucking pets because it's like this is a lot. And I think it's just such a good book. I love every time you unmute the mic, your dog starts barking. Just makes me laugh so much. It's okay. Look, people, if you're listening and complaining about Nash's dog barking, there's no money in this. We make no money. We are at home. There's the dog right there. Look
He
at it.
came to visit.
Yeah. If you're listening to the podcast about Dungeon Crawler Carl and you're
Mm.
complaining about pets interrupting, you shouldn't be listening to Dungeon Crawler Carl because you have clearly missed the point. But yeah, you're right. Donut is such a good character. Um, what was I gonna say? You had points to make on Donut, though. You go ahead. I can't remember what I was talking about.
That's okay. Sorry, this guy distracted me a little bit here. Um, but no, yeah, I love just the imagery you painted there in the start, where it's the rage elemental, right? Killing out new players. I think there is a lot of that vulnerability with a lot of the players in this first book, where they're really starting to, struggling to understand elements of the dungeon. Some of the older guys don't really give a shit about the patch notes talking about, hey, if you pee on the walls, rage elemental, it's gonna spawn and you're gonna be upset. Everyone's gonna die. Right? I think that that extends even to Carl and Donut, as a whole, right? Because there's a number of fights in this first book where they kind of seem, "Oh, I'm not getting out of this." Especially one that comes to mind, I think, is the Crack Heron boss, where Carl just straight up is like, "Yeah, I think I'm dead. Love you, Donut. Bye." And there's this really heartfelt moment of vulnerability amongst the 2 protagonists where they s they've recognized that this is potentially the end, and you as the reader, you share in their dread. Now, obviously, as you said, you don't share in that dread as much when you know there's 8 books, but I people who were reading this when there was only 1 were real scared at that point in time. Um, but kind of bridging it back into Donut, like, I think that the evolution of her character is so fascinating, and there's also, like, I'll start with the evolution of her character, and then I'll get into, like, obviously, the multiple plots surrounding Donut. Um, I think you see it right away, whereas Donut, she starts off like, "Oh, I am the princess, and I will command my royal bodyguard to do as I wish," and she immediately starts trying to boss Carl around in a capacity similar to what I would only imagine a an actual cat would sound like if they learned how to talk. Eh, Carl says something to the same point in the book where he's kinda talking about, like, "You know why people like cats? They can tolerate cats because they can't fucking talk." Alright? And if they could, we'd have got rid of all the cats a long time ago. And I think Donut embodies that persona right away, very, very quickly, just immediately commanding Carl, like, "This is what we must do." And Carl, he kinda gets to a point where he's like, "Whatever, okay, I don't need to hang out with you, that's fine. Imma go
Mhm.
this way. I don't care about your magic items. I don't need any of this. I'm leaving." And then Donut realizes, like, "Oh, no, he's actually gonna leave me." And you see that vulnerability open up real quick, um, that breaks through that initial naivety, I think, that Donut has as a character, and shows you, like, that the necessity of her bond to Carl. It's a little bit more than her superficial, her posturing as, like, this regal figure where she realizes, like, look, she's just a pet and she's scared, and is reacting in the way that maybe you would expect a cat to react with its odor. And the bond that grows between them, I think in this whole novel is just really, really, really beautiful. Like, you get to a point where I think it's after the Crack Heron boss where Donut says, "If we die, I want you to know I love you, Carl. I don't love you as much as Miss Beatrice because she's, my person, or as much as I love Ferdinand, but I love you." And there's a point later on in the novel where she does actually even backtrack on that. It's like, "I just love you, Carl." It's this beautiful full circle moment though, where she goes from being he goes from being portrayed as her manservant to being portrayed as like, "Oh yeah, that's her owner." And Carl, I think, in contrast, really starts out as this guy who's like, "Ah, my friggin' girlfriend's cat, of all the things to be stuck in here with my ex-girl cat." But then you start to see that same story unraveling, in a similar capacity for Carl, where he's talking about like, "Oh, yeah, Bee and her mom, I think they were gonna get rid of Donut, so I was looking into potentially catnapping her," right? And you start to see that despite Carl's posturing, he really cares about Donut too, and there's a reason he had her with him. There's a reason that he followed her out of the house, which, inadvertently ended up saving his life. There's a reason he followed her down into the dungeons because he gives a shit about this cat too, right? And the beauty of that bond, I think, is one of the core strengths of the work itself. The love between an owner and a pet, but and something that I think gets addressed, I don't know if it's at the end of this book or near the beginning of book 2, is that, like, Donut's not just a pet anymore, right? Like, Donut is
He's doing
she becomes more than a pet. She becomes a friend to Carl. She becomes, something that I feel like personally you can feel this way about pets too, but Carl talks about this capacity, right? So the evolution of, I guess, her character and as well, like their relationship as a whole is one of the really, really cool elements of this novel. I love that there is that side plot though in the background that damn it again, he's painting the foundation of, which is that, oh, Beatrice was gonna get rid of Donut potentially at some point, right? And sorry. And she doesn't know that. Right. So it's all really cool.
Yeah. I think, and I agree, the side plots are what make that story, uh, just like side quests, and I think you at book 2 and 3, you are getting to the start of, like, the intricate side plots, side quests that kind of affect the main storyline, and the idea that NPCs in those ones are, like, programmed to only experience a certain way. But we don't have a lot of time left. I just wanna highlight one thing, and I think this is the perfect example of the range this book has. This is page 324, and it's the description of the rage elemental. The first recorded summoning of a rage elemental, blah, blah, blah. If you're reading this, you likely don't give a shit about the monster's rather interesting and tragic history. You're probably running. It's not going to matter. The almost indestructible rage elemental, it is said to only dissipate after its claimed 666 souls. In other words, you are fucked. Absolutely bite the pillow fucked. This, on the other hand, is page 325, the very next page. When the apocalypse came for Yolanda, she didn't once waver in her dedication to her patients. She was quick to laugh and quick to smile. And even though Yolanda Martinez was just as terrified as the rest of us, she stood her ground against a force that she couldn't possibly hold back. She lived her entire life as a hero. She died as one too. That not only are those a page apart, they are literally right next to each other. And I think in that description, that is all you really need to say about the Dungeon Crawler Carl books, is their ability to do both incredibly well. And it gets better. The writing and the story and the prose, everything gets better, just as everything does with time. But this, I think this is one example in a field of many in this book alone that highlight that ability. And I think it's just a phenomenal book. And as you go through them and as we talk about them more on here, we'll begin to explore that. But I think we'll end it there because one of the main complaints I've been getting about Vox boxes is that some of them are too long, and we're gonna try a different thing. Um, Nash, as always, I am very glad to have you here. Nash is also a part of Broken Shadow, which we've taken a little bit of a break from so that the four of us, five of us have time to exist in our actual lives. And what with two of us having full time careers and the other finishing up school and whatnot, we took some time off. But also keep an eye out for Authors Vox, which starts this week with the independent authors that I've signed up that have graciously agreed to appear on the podcast to talk about their novels. That's this week, which is July. This will come out July 7th. What day is it? Tuesday, July 7th. This will be available. Um, and starting Friday, July whatever the hell that is. You can find those on Spotify and everywhere else where you're listening to these. But overall, thank you, Nash, for joining us, and thank you for listening to Dungeon Crawler Carl after I've basically begged you to do so for months on end. So,
Thank you for having me, and thank you for showing
yeah.
me. It's an amazing
And thank
series.
you.
Let it be.
Yeah. And thank you to our guest star, Loki the dog.
This is Eddie. Loki is the
Eddie
other.
the dog. Loki's the other one. Well, now I fucked it up. Eddie, what are you doing? Perfect. Okay. Well, um, thank you, my friend, and stay magical, everybody.
Bye.